Happy early birthday, Cartoonist Lover 16. As an early birthday present, actually extremely early birthday present, I decided to do a dramatic reading of your fan fiction, Robot and Monster, The Party alternate ending. Enjoy! I hope I'm able to do it justice. I'm going to start out by reading the author's note, so anyone else who's not really familiar with the story gets perspective on what your stance and perspective was while writing it. Author's note. My third R&M story, and with an alternate ending. If any R&M fans had seen the most recent episode called The Party, not only do we see crazy cousin Gizmo again, but we're given many reasons to dislike Robot's family, especially his mother, Arpa Default. I really liked The Party. It had a powerful message, and we see how Robot is able to stand up to his own mother at times, especially to defend his mentally ill cousin, who's even more shunned than he already is. I'm not sure I like Arpa, and though the ending to that episode was okay, I decided to make an alternate ending. Okay, after reading the author's note, I'm going to get right into reading the story now. Robot quickly looked over his shoulder, making sure his dear cousin was close behind him as they continued running from the band of security guards, hot on their metallic tails. No use trying to place on a cold and indifferent demeanor any longer. The party was wrecked, and same went for Garth's painting, which the older Default sibling resumed sobbing over. All the guests were trying to withhold being overwhelmed over the stunning fiasco that had just occurred moments before. Everyone was either troubled, angered, or miserable, except for Monster, who was just happy to finally find the dip. The orange mechanical swerved to the right, his cousin duplicating his action as they were nearly tackled by their pursuers. As they kept running, Robot took this time to actually contemplate the events earlier that had led to what was occurring this very moment. He was not at all surprised when he learned how his own family had tried to keep the party secret from him, but it still did hurt, and old feelings of his earlier years returned to throw salt in his wounds. But he was determined to make a good impression, hoping, just hoping, he would earn the slightest bit of approval by his own mother. Then, crazy cousin Gizmo just had to drop in on his and Monster's apartment at the last minute. Not surprising he didn't know about the party either. But he did. And, much like Monster, he was excited, even mentioning about his so-called fiancée, Princess Invisible, being the belle of the ball. Robot had hoped to keep him away, to save the humiliation and destruction of his brother's party. But crazy cousin Gizmo wasn't called crazy for nothing. However, reality hit Robot when he compared himself to his schizophrenic cousin. They were the same. Unique, imaginative, total originals, and both were shunned by their own family. Gizmo more so, but still. Robot never thought he could ever admit something like that, but he did, and he actually scolded his own mother for not being more considerate when she demanded crazy cousin Gizmo thrown out. In his honest opinion, his cousin lightened the event a bit, his zany, wacky personality breaking the cold, indifferent atmosphere that Robot never admired. And Robot wanted to share in his cousin's enthusiasm, so he danced with Princess Invisible. At least he tried. To play along with these imaginative figures only his cousin could point out was very frustrating, but Robot would do anything to please his cousin. He loved him very much, he finally knew. And loving his dear cousin is why they were now being chased by security. His mother wanted both of them thrown out. Crazy cousin Gizmo? Robot breathed heavily as he felt his wheels growing hot as fire from massive use of speed. Yes, sang Cousin Robot, his cousin puffed, pumping his long legs as best he could. Robot panted for a few moments. I'm sorry. Despite being pursued by men in uniform, crazy cousin Gizmo casted his beloved cousin a confused glance. For what? Robot looked over his shoulder, his yellow glass eyes gazing at him sadly, while he made sure his wheels were directing him to avoid obstacles in their way. For everything, he confessed quietly, "especially for the way I treated you." His cousin's eyes widened slightly. "But, saying Cousin Robot, you—" He was suddenly tackled by one guard, who ejected from across the room, pinning the schizophrenic mechanical to the ground. Robot immediately stopped in his tracks, gasping in horror. However, before he could do anything, another guard tackled him to the ground, his weight nearly crushing the shorter mechanical. Despite his inner parts being squeezed like an orange, Robot desperately tried to reach out to his cousin, the lankier mechanical being severely crushed under the massive weight of the other guard. "Gizmo!" Robot cried, trying to extend his claw. His cousin returned the action, trying to reach out to him as well. "Robot!" When the commotion ended, and the weight of the guards was finally lifted off of them, the two cousins immediately got to their feet, standing close to each other, not daring to break the embrace they developed just seconds ago. Everyone stared at the two cousins, emotions of disapproval, astonishment, and even fury enveloping the entire room. But there was one face that the two were quite fearful of at this very moment. "Look at what you've done!" Arpa Default shrieked, forgetting her sophisticated manner as she wheeled at the two boys angrily. She casted her glare at crazy Cousin Gizmo, her petite eyes narrowing more than they usually did. "I never thought we would see the likes of you again after we deliberately had you placed in that mental institution." Her beady eyes stared deeply into her nephew's frightened ones, her lips curving menacingly. "You're as worse as ever," she snapped, "and there's certainly no hope you'll ever improve." Robot's eyes widened in horror as he just stared at his mother. He turned toward his cousin, and his heart instantly broke to see the tearful expression on the usually cheerful mechanical he knew so well. For as long as he knew crazy Cousin Gizmo, this was the first time he had ever seen him crushed. However, Robot was unable to pay any mental comfort to him as his mother wheeled in his direction, her eyes blazing angrily. "And you!" she started, pointing an accusing finger at her younger son. "This is all your fault if you hadn't brought him along!" She jabbed her head in her nephew's direction. "This party would have gone swimmingly. In fact, this party would never have come to this if you hadn't come like we wanted." Robot could only stand there, his claws grasping each other, his bottom lip quivering as he tried to keep a strong face while bearing every single one of his mother's words. However, Arpa wasn't done yet. "I'm so disappointed in you, Robot," she said coldly. "In fact, beyond disappointed." She flailed her arms angrily. Gart, after recovering from his emotional distress of having his painting ruined, just shook his head, grateful his little brother was being severely scolded by his mother. Everyone simply watched as Mrs. Default talked down on Robot. "You are officially banned from family events," Arpa announced angrily. "In fact, from the family as well." Robot felt like a lightning rod had just jabbed itself right into his mechanized heart as he stared at her, his yellow eyes larger than they had been. As a child, he suffered being the family outcast, always being compared lowly to his brother Gart. His parents would always ask him why he had to be the way he was, and not cold and indifferent as they were. A disappointment, a failure, a black sheep of the family. Nothing. Nobody in his family liked him. "Terrible," Arpa muttered. Nobody. "Despicable." No one. "Horrible." Who could ever... Sing Cousin Robot? Except... Robot slowly raised his eyes and gazed into the scared, concerned ones of crazy Cousin Gizmo. While his mother continued ranting about his faults, the smaller mechanical suddenly found a little comfort in seeing the soothing expression of his cousin. His dear, kind-hearted, loving cousin, the only family member who cared about him and loved him for who he was, and vice versa. "And Gizmo!" Arpa's voice cut through their special moment as Bill turned to her. "Engaged to a princess! Please!" She rolled her eyes. "Obviously, you're much crazier than you appear. Only a princess in your own mind would actually lower down to marrying the likes of someone like you." Robot gasped. Then he looked over at Gizmo, who suddenly appeared small as his shoulders hunched, his back lowered, and his legs nearly giving out on him. He looked even more crushed than before. Robot may not have shared the same imagination as his insane cousin, but he could have sworn he could feel Princess Invisible's presence. He thought he felt a blaze of anger between him and his cousin. However, her anger was nowhere near as powerful as the Orange Mechanical's. He suddenly couldn't take it anymore. All this verbal abuse, being cast aside like trash off the street. He especially couldn't handle seeing his dear cousin suffer anymore as well. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice reverberating off the walls. The anger and authority in his voice placed the whole room into silence. It even brought his mother to cease her rant, as the impact of his tone made her small eyes grow slightly large in surprise. The only sound was Monster, who continued eating bacon strips after dipping them into his bowl as he watched the scene unfold in anticipation. Robot panted heavily, his eyes narrowing in anger as he glared at his mother. He wheeled forward, standing between her and crazy cousin Gizmo. "I have had it with you!" His voice slightly cracked, but the burning determination in his tone resumed as he pointed a two-fingered claw at the woman he realized he disliked just as much as his father and brother. Arpa was unable to say anything, intimidated by this whole new side to her quiet, dull son. "If you want to cut me off from the family, fine," Robot spat. "It's not like you haven't done it in the past." Murmurs emerged from the spectators, who resumed watching the scene before them. "You shunned me because I'm different," the short mechanical stated. "You never paid much attention to me in the slightest, just because I'm not like you guys." He paused for a few minutes, allowing the words to sink in. "Well, I never want to be." He threw his arms up, bringing the point down on every hateful member of his family. "I don't want to be the same cold, heartless jerk whose only amusement is seeing others miserable." He glared at his mother. "Even to this day, you treat me like I'm some contagious disease, always calling me a disappointment. Well, you're the real disappointment." Arpa felt her cylinder-shaped antennas lower fearfully as she felt smaller in the presence of her younger son. "What kind of mother treats her younger son like garbage? What kind of mother just goes and shuns him from his own family? What kind of aunt are you to just go and hurt your own nephew?" He turned toward crazy cousin Gizmo, who stared at him in shock. Robot managed a small smile before it immediately disappeared as he turned back to Arpa. "No one in the family, not even you, Grandma, and Gart, had even bothered to visit him at the mental asylum," he accused angrily. "He's not some wild beast, you guys. He's just some guy with an active imagination. What the heck is wrong with you guys? What is wrong with you, Mother?" Monster's hand touched an empty bowl, having consumed all of the bacon while watching the interaction between his best friend and his mother. His concern continued growing, and resorted to him biting his hand. "I love crazy cousin Gizmo," Robot announced, loud enough for the whole city to hear. "He's the only family member that likes me for me, and I the same for him." He smiled for a moment. "We're not that different." If Gizmo wasn't so overwhelmed by everything going on, he would have smiled at Robot, feeling like so much was finally lifting off of him. "You know what?" Robot snapped at his mother. "After all this, after seeing how you still can't accept me, and especially my cousin Gizmo—" His claw immediately grasped Gizmo's fingers. "I don't care anymore. I hate this family. It took me this long to realize that now." With no words left to say, Robot turned on his wheels, dragging his cousin behind him as they left Arpa's sight, ignoring the ongoing stares by everyone in the room, even the expression of disbelief on Gart's face. Robot turned momentarily to see Monster following close behind them. Monster, dump that dip, Robot sighed as if he had just gone through a day of hard labor. It's fat-free. Really? His best friend asked in surprise. Come on, the orange robot managed a chuckle. We'll buy better dip. We'll have our own party. He looked up at his cousin. Our own family event. Crazy Cousin Gizmo gave a small smile, sniffling. Thank you, sang Cousin Robot. Lady Madam watched from a corner of the room, simply taking in everything she had just witnessed. Despite having suffered a minor injury and nearly having her precious hat trampled, and her earlier seething anger of how this night had turned out, she couldn't help but think. She casted her gaze on Arpa Default, the mother simply standing in the exact place the entire time, her eyes glued toward the doorway where her son had just exited. Although now wasn't the best time to think about it, Lady Madam felt she, indeed, had something to write in her article. There's a break right here. The night was pleasant, and the air carried a calm atmosphere as the three carried themselves away from the site of the blinking lights factory. Robot appeared to be leading the way, though his mind seemed drifted, unable to cancel out what had just happened back there. Monster nervously played with his hands, both he and Crazy Cousin Gizmo, gazing at the backside of the orange mechanical. You know, Robot, the purple organic finally broke the silence, that was pretty much just wow. Are you okay, saying Cousin Robot? Crazy Cousin Gizmo asked. Robot slowly stopped in his tracks, halting the other two behind him. He let out a deep sigh, then quietly turned to the two people he was glad to be with after tonight's horrid disaster. Honestly, guys, he spoke calmly, I actually feel great. In fact, years of bottled-up rage and stuff. He managed a small smile. I'm just glad to have finally let it out. It's always good to let it all out, Monster encouraged. Maybe now your family can try and treat you better. Robot's smile faded, and he just shook his head. Monster, you've known my family for years. The Default family has always been a group of selfish, greedy, boring jerks. He lowered his eyes, gazing down at the R plated on his chest. I'm happy I'm not one of them. Then he raised his eyes to stare at his cousin, and his smile returned. And same for my crazy cousin Gizmo, he added, the only Default family member I truly ever admired. Oh, Robot, his insane cousin sighed, greatly touched. Deep down, I never thought any family member would still like me, ever since I started seeing invisible people. Which began way back during childhood when you had your first imaginary friend, Monster pointed out. But you, saying Cousin Robot, the taller mechanical smiled tearfully. You accept me for who I am. Before Robot could respond, his cousin dropped down to his knees and embraced him. Thankfully, it was late, so no one could witness the slightly awkward event occurring in the middle of the street. But Robot could care less. His bulky arms snaked their way around his cousin's upper frame, and he pulled him tighter, as if not daring to let go. Boy, Monster smiled, sniffing a bit at the wonderful moment. I've never even seen you hug Gart like that. In fact, I've never seen you hug Gart at all. Robot shifted his eyes in Monster's direction, a cold look visible in his eyes. That would be my death wish, he snapped quietly. After he and his beloved cousin finally ended their embrace, Robot's smile returned, his eyes now rounded in excitement. Well, night's still young, he commented with a chuckle. Let's all head to the Making Bacon. Yay! Monster cheered. Our own little party. Ah, yes, Crazy Cousin Gizmo pondered. Haven't been there in a while. He shifted his gaze to the empty space beside him. How about it, darling? Robot did his best not to cringe as he regarded his cousin speak to his invisible fiancée. If crazy Cousin Gizmo was in love with his own imagination, so be it. Though, for the shorter mechanical, it could only be a matter of time before things would become very awkward when came the time to actually plan the wedding. Another break. After a night at the Make and Bacon, to many rounds of the greasy product, the trio returned to the apartment. Robot and Monster had converted the couch in their living room into a bed, placing a few pillows and grabbing a few spare blankets from the closet. Crazy Cousin Gizmo would never, ever go to that mental institution again. "There now," Robot said softly as he laid his cousin against the soft cushions. "Better than the White Room, right?" "Oh, yes," his cousin chuckled, "although it'll take some getting used to." "Well, that's fine," Monster said cheerfully. "And Princess Invisible can rummage through our fridge any time she wants." Robot rolled his eyes at the mention of his cousin's fiancée, but he kept a smile. "Oh, that reminds me!" Crazy Cousin Gizmo giggled rather childishly as he snuggled under the covers. He gave Robot a warm, loving smile. "My favorite saying, Cousin Robot," he said proudly, "when you have the honor of becoming my best man." Although all of this was just a figure of the insane mechanical's imagination, Robot's eyes widened in astonishment. "Me?" he gasped in disbelief. "Well, yes," his cousin chuckled. "You are, after all, my favorite cousin." He lightly gripped his blankets and averted his gaze. "You're all the family I have." "Oh," Monster unintentionally intervened, scratching his head. "I guess the rest of the default family aren't invited, huh?" "Not a chance," Crazy Cousin Gizmo spat. "Princess Invisible certainly doesn't like them, and I doubt her family from the Crystal Kingdom will as well." He smiled down at Robot once more, awaiting the smaller mechanical's answer. Robot, despite remembering his cousin's mental disorder, immediately hopped with excitement. "Yes!" he cried. He began hopping around in place, much to the amusement of Monster and his cousin. "Yes, yes, 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 yes!" However, Robot soon realized his actions and quickly ceased his hopping, clearing his throat in slight embarrassment. He smiled sheepishly. "Yes." "Splendid!" Crazy Cousin Gizmo exclaimed. "And, Monster," he smiled at the organic, "Princess Invisible would love to have you as one of her bridesmaids. You're practically family to us as well." "Really?" Monster beamed. "Yay!" Crazy Cousin Gizmo smiled happily, before jerking his head in the other direction, gazing into empty space. "What's that, darling?" He spoke towards nothingness. "Right now? Well, all right, but come back soon, okay?" "What?" Robot asked, doing his best to play along. "Oh, Princess Invisible just needs to head back to the Crystal Kingdom to inform her family that you two have accepted to come to our wedding at the castle," his cousin explained. "A castle?" Monster gasped with delight. "Well, they're royalty, of course," Crazy Cousin Gizmo laughed. "However, they are a modern royal family. Their business is quite powerful." "Man, he sure has a good imagination," Robot thought. "Ta-ta, darling!" his cousin waved toward the door. Robot just rolled his eyes, while Monster followed Crazy Cousin Gizmo's example. However, before their eyes, the door opened, then closed. Robot's eyes widened like dinner plates, and his jaw fell in utter disbelief. Monster, however, remained as happy as ever, hoping Princess Invisible would return soon. But maybe he's not so crazy after all, Robot thought with a slight shiver of both discomfort as well as excitement. If what he had just seen was truly plausible, then he couldn't wait to visit the Crystal Kingdom that Crazy Cousin Gizmo had been speaking of. Another break. ARPA let out a stressful sigh as she rolled toward the coffee table of her massive bedroom. She slept horribly last night. Her butler had already placed a tray of her morning baking coffee and biscuits along with the newspaper Arpa had been looking forward to. However, now she wished the article was out of her sight, the events of last night drilling into her golden exterior. While she was sure Lady Madam had given her older son's party a horrid review, that was the least of her anxiety. Her thoughts could not escape her younger son. His heated words, his angry glare, and how he stood close to that bumbling fool of a cousin at Reckguard's party as well as his portrait. But Robot loved him either way, and he even went as far to cut the rest of his family from both him and Gizmo. He said he hated her. Arpa couldn't succumb what to think now that the inevitable had been done, and she might not ever see her younger son again, nor would Guard ever see him step foot inside the Blinking Lights factory, ever. Her generated heart was pained with grief and guilt. She let out another sigh as she reluctantly reached for the newspaper. So what if the review was that severe? Nothing could be worse than having perhaps lost her younger son. Her eyes trailed over Lady Madam's column. I must admit, the grand party of the Default family was not quite what I expected. Was it splendid? Was it awful? In my opinion, the party was rather intense and quite heart-rending. The people were cold and indifferent as ever. The party was calm and sophisticated, and everything seemed fine. However, I came across a young man by the name of Robot Default, the youngest son of the Default family, quite distinctive from his brother and mother, and rather unusual to say the least. But he does serve quite gentlemanlike quality. He is a rather nice conversationalist. The unveiling of Gart Default's portrait was astounding, lovely features and all. I say, the party started out quite well. Then it was soon disrupted by a rather awkward fellow, who seems to have some sort of bond with Robot Default. I later found out they were cousins. I kept close eyes on the fellow, quite appalled by such behavior, as well as his dancing, not even close to cold or indifferent. Then it became incredible horrifying when I witnessed Robot Default fall step dancing with nothingness. Security was quick to arrive, however. That led to the fall of the party. Oh, how chaotic it was! I nearly had my favorite hat destroyed and crashed into the portrait. Thank goodness there had been a doctor present. But, despite the terrible events I had become victim to, as well as the fate of the portrait, I must confess that none of that seems bothersome to me anymore. My regards have fallen on Robot Default and his family. I was astounded to watch him stand by that barbarian with a mental illness, his loyalty and love forever bound to him while he spoke rather harshly to his mother, Arpa Default. The moment was rather suspenseful, and my heart was pumping at an incredible rate. This moment was about family, and how family was family no matter what. Robot Default openly stated how important the insane man beside him was, and how the rest of his family, including Arpa Default, were severe disappointments to him. The circle had been broken, as Robot Default left in a huff, with his insane cousin and loyal friend in tow. This could possibly be the last he would ever see his mother or any of the Default family. The disaster of the party has faded from my thoughts as my mind has been clogged by the sheer agony of what has become a rather tragic event. I may not have children of my own, but to lose one's child in the competition between status and acceptance, honestly, it must be heartbreaking. The article fell from Arpa's hand, nearly bumping into her cup of baking coffee. The mechanical's bottom lip quivered as she furiously tried to blink away the tears threatening in her eyes. Finally, she buried her face in her arms and sobbed quietly. And that's the end. Thanks for sticking around for the entire reading of this. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye.